One of the advantages of using Supabase over other, more proprietary database backends is that underneath the easy-to-use UI, all commands are translated into corresponding SQL statements. From creating tables to hold your data, to complex views for displaying your data, to various ways of making this data work for you, all of that is accomplished with specific SQL statements. The major benefit of this is that you can enlist the help of tools such as ChatGPT to easily and effortlessly build out your entire backend storage. This is something you can't easily do with Firebase or other proprietary databases. And so in today's video, I want to show you my entire ChatGPT workflow that will undoubtedly simplify and speed up the time that it takes you to go from a simple app idea to a full-featured data backend. After watching this video, you will never again build a backend for your apps the same way. Now, before we get started, remember all the apps and resources that I mentioned on this channel are going to be available to view and or clone from my Patreon page. And that includes my entire ChatGPT workflow. And you can easily learn about our amazing Patreon community using the link below the video. Well, let's say you're starting a brand new app project. Well, one of the first things that you need to do is you need to decide on your data schema, and you can use ChatGPT to help you out. So here we're looking at a simple chat transcript where I ask ChatGPT to come up with a design for a particular app. So in this case, you're my relationship database consultant. I'm building a Tinder clone app and using Supabase as the backend. Tell me what kind of tables I need in order to store all the data. And so it's telling me a little bit about the kind of app that I'm looking to build. And then it gives me a list of tables. Okay, so it came up with users, it came up with matches, as well as messages, swipes, and also user photos, user preferences, user settings as well. And most importantly, it also comes up with relationships, right? This is very, very important. You want to make sure that not only do you have the tables, but you also understand the relationship. Is it going to be one-to-one, one-to-many, or many-to-many, right? It's very, very important. And so here it's telling you that users and matches, a user can have multiple matches, but a match is between two users, okay? Matches and messages, swipes and users, user and user photos, etc., okay? And it also gives you some notes to take into account. So it's doing a lot of the thinking that you would typically need to do for yourself, right? It's saving you a lot of time, okay? Now, check this out. I also went a step further. I said, show me a visual relationship diagram for the tables above, right? Because I'm a visual learner, right? I understand things visually. If you're also like me, or even if you're not like me, this is definitely going to help you out. And so it's telling me that it can't quite create a visual diagram, but it can do it using ASCII art, right? ASCII are these characters here, right? That, programs recognize. And so here you have users, matches, and messages. And if you scroll down, there's also a legend. So it's saying that one and this asterisk denote the one and many sides of a relationship respectively, right? So here you can see users, one, matches, asterisk. So that means that, one user can have multiple matches, and you also have matches to messages. So that means that, one match can have many messages, right? And this kind of makes sense because, for instance, if you're swiping, you might have multiple matches. And then for each match, you can have multiple messages like in a chat. So, and this kind of continues here, right? So you also have users to swipes, you have users to user photos, user preferences, user settings, etc., etc. So it's doing a lot of the thinking for you right away, like in a split second, essentially. And this is something that can take some time because you definitely want to get this right. Okay, so it's also explaining users and matches, etc., etc. Now, I also did the same thing for a group chat app. Okay, so I said I'm building a group chat app and using Supabase as my backend. Tell me what kind of tables I need in order to store all of this data. So I went ahead and created users, groups, group members, messages, and then user friends, but this is optional, and it's also telling you that optional if you want to manage friend relationships. So typically you probably won't need this table right here, and it's also telling you the relationships, and it created this visual representation, right? So you have users can have many groups. Each group can have many messages, and then you have group members and user friends as well. And then last but not least, I also asked it to create a data model for a Amazon.com e-commerce type app that I'm actually building right now. That's going to be on the channel soon. And so I asked it what kind of tables I need to store all this data, and it went ahead and it, created the schema for me. Users, products, categories, orders, order items, reviews, addresses, right? So it's thinking that a user can have multiple addresses. And in fact, when I started to build out this app, I didn't think about like multiple addresses, I'm thinking like one address. Okay, so it's a couple of steps ahead of me, right? Payment methods, okay, also payment methods, right? So you have relationship and explanation, and so you have users and products, categories, and reviews, etc., etc. And down at the bottom, it also has a couple of nodes, things like security, data integrity, real-time availability, scalability, regulatory compliance. So a lot of this you don't have to worry about, right? So security is something you have to think about, and all of these other things you might have to think about a little bit later, right? They're not as important in the initial stages. Now, another thing that you can do, and I actually do this all the time, is that you can consult ChatGPT with a question about a particular design that you are looking to implement. So it's not exactly like you're coming in and you want a design. You already have a design that you want to do, but you're not sure about some specifics maybe, or maybe a field, or maybe how it's going to work together. And so here I'm asking, let's say I'm building a Tinder clone. How do I design tables in a relational database to track users that the person using the app has already seen? Is that a one-to-many or a many-to-many relationship? So I kind of know what to do, but I'm not clear about a specific point in this design. I'm not clear about something in this design, but I got like 80% of it down. This is different compared to what we talked about previously. And here's the reply. In a Tinder-like application, when considering the relationship between users and the profiles they have seen or swiped on, we are dealing with a many-to-many relationship. This is because one user can swipe on many users, and likewise, one user can be swiped on by many users. Okay, and it goes on to kind of explain to you what it's talking about. Now, it's important to mention that it's also referring these tables that we talked about above, but you do not need to ask it about a design first. This is exactly where I was. I kind of knew the design coming into it, but I wasn't clear on a particular point. And as a result, this is the first question that I asked it, and it still helped me out without having this extra context where we asked a question previously, right? So it went ahead and it talked about these tables. It gave me an explanation, relationships, and it's also giving me interesting advice here, notes, right? Avoiding resurfacing profiles, very, very important. This is something that I talked about when I built Tinder apps before. To prevent users from seeing profiles they've already swiped on, the application should query the swipes table to retrieve all the swipe IDs related to a particular swiper ID. Okay, so swiper is the person swiping, and swipee is the person that they're swiping on, and exclude these profiles from being fetched again. So very, very important. You get an extra tip. But really, the beauty of this prompt is that you're getting clarification on something that you are not sure about, something that you have doubts on. So you're getting a clarification. And I do this all the time. I do this all the time when I'm not really 100% sure. I haven't really thought something through, and I need to find out if I'm on the right track. So use this as well. Once you asked it for a design, or once you've checked what kind of tables that it came up with, and you're happy with the design, the next logical thing that you can do is you can ask it to actually generate SQL statements for creating the actual tables. And so this is exactly what I did. I said, show me SQL statements for creating tables for a Tinder clone, okay? And it's telling us below are SQL create table statements to define the fundamental tables for a Tinder clone, okay? and it went ahead and generated the SQL statements for actually creating the tables. Now, of course, you can go into Supabase and you can click on table editor here, and you can click on a new table, and you can do that manually if you want. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing it manually. But if you want to save some time, you can use this method. I can simply copy this right here, go back into my Supabase, go to the SQL editor here, and paste the SQL statement here in my SQL editor. Now, it's important to mention that Supabase has its own Supabase AI that you can use to create or modify queries. And I do use it from time to time, but I do believe this ChatGPT method is a much more encompassing method because it allows you to do everything from A to Z instead of working on a specific query. And once I have this SQL statement here, I can maybe modify it. Let's say I want to make sure that I have Z prepended to my table here. And I also need to make sure that I've created that users table before, and then I can execute this SQL statement in order to create a table for me. So I can simply click on run here and wait to see what happens. And it's telling me, okay, we have an error. Failed to run SQL query, relation users does not exist. And that is because it's referencing this users table that it generated here. But because we're not using this users table, but instead we're using the built-in users table, we can actually debug this query right in ChatGPT as well. And if we try to debug this query, this is what it comes up with. So it immediately understands that we're using Supabase, and it understands the kind of mistakes it made previously and how to correct them. So we can copy this new code here, paste it in here, and execute it. And now we have success, no rows returned, and we can go back to our table editor. And here we can see the table that ChatGPT generated a SQL for. And if we click on definition, you can see that this is exact table right here, and you can obviously add data to this table. You can insert row and do all of this manually. But why would you want to create this data manually when you can also use ChatGPT to generate all this data for you? So here I'm asking it to create 10 records in CSV format for swipes. Okay, and it's telling me, sure, here's an example of 10 records for the swipes table in CSV format. Okay, and it's also giving us an explanation here as well. So we can easily copy all of this CSV formatted data here, go back to Supabase, and here you can click on insert, import data from CSV, paste text, and you can paste this data right here. And you can configure import data by clicking here. You also have a preview of data to be imported. And the only thing that's left to do is click on import data, and all of this data is going to be imported into your database. Now, just keep in mind that when you're creating this data, make sure that it's using IDs of users that you already have in your database. So if you go into your auth table here and you go into your users table, you can see that this table already has some sample users. So you want to make sure that the IDs match up, because remember, they're referenced on that other table. So you want to make sure that the references actually point to existing users. And you can easily do that by telling ChatGPT to use these IDs. So all you want to do is you want to select the IDs, go back here, and you can easily tell it to use these IDs. Make sure that you use the following user IDs, something like this, and then you can list your user IDs, click save and submit, and here it has generated a new CSV data dump with the IDs that we specified. So whenever you have IDs that are referenced into another table, you want to make sure that those IDs actually exist and that ChatGPT is not creating random IDs. Very, very important. Now, the next scenario is actually one of the main reasons that I chose Supabase over Firebase and other NoSQL data backends. And that is the fact that you can create views, pull various data from multiple tables if necessary in order to display the right data for a specific screen. And you can easily get ChatGPT to create create these views for you. So as an example, here's my new prompt. I'm working on a profile screen in my app, so help me create a SQL that will generate a view with the following data. So I give it the data that I need, and I'm also mentioning that I'm using Supabase, so make sure to reference user info to auth.users ID. And here I'm pointing out that I'm using Supabase, so make sure to reference user info to this table here. And this is something that I probably don't need to do, because as long as I tell it that I'm using Supabase, it will figure out that the user info is actually stored in a different schema called auth, as opposed to the public schema where you're going to be creating your tables. And this is what it came up with: to generate a view that contains user info. All of this, let's consider that the location information is stored in auth users table. If not, you need to adjust it. And this is the view that it came up with. And so this is the view that I told it that I need for a specific screen. And it's important to understand that here I'm being declarative. I know the view that I'm building. I know what kind of data that I need. I don't care how the system comes up with this data. I just want the data. And in many situations, you need to do something aggregate to the data. Maybe you need to get a count of the data. You need to sum it. You need to do some aggregation of data that exists in other tables, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what relational databases are, right? You have relations and you need to get this data back into one view. And so you need to do some kind of aggregation. This is exactly what's happening here. So we're getting email and username and location from another table, this users table, but we're also doing aggregation. In this case, this is count on swipe direction, and we're also filtering. So we're doing a count where the user swiped left, and we're doing a count where the user swiped right. And probably this is not going to be a screen on the real app, but maybe on the dashboard or some analytics or something, right? You guys get the picture. And as a result, we have this view. Now I can copy this view. I can go back to my Supabase here, and I can go back to SQL editor here. I can paste it in here, and I have a view. Now I need to make sure that I have location there. So if I don't have location, let's say I delete location. So let's do it without location. And then I can easily execute it, and let's see what happens. And so it's telling me username does not exist, so maybe username is called something else. Let's remove username for now, and if I run it, I get success, no rows returned. And so it ended up creating a view according to my instructions, and this is going to be fairly complex to do with Firebase, because you'll have to do it either in Flutterflow or you need to create a custom function. But here in the SQL for this view, we actually have a bunch of conditions, right? These are kind of like mini functions that do the aggregation. So these two here, this first one is doing aggregation where the swipe direction is true and we're calling it right swipes. And the second one is saying swipe direction is false and we're calling it left swipes, and we're doing a count on that. So this is very, very cool. And if I go back to my tables and views here, I should see that view right in my list. And here's this user profile view. So if I click on it, this view is going to give me the data that I want. And looking at this view, we have a list of emails, and we also have the number of right swipes for each record and the number of left swipes. And right now it's all zeros because we haven't actually been using the app, so we don't have any records in the corresponding tables. But when we start actually using the app, we're gonna have records. And so we have like 2 records that, direction is, right swipe or something. You're gonna have 2 here. And if we have, let's say, 10 records for left swipe, you're gonna have 10 here. So it's very, very easy to create complex views to display the data, and only the data that we need for a specific UI screen in a very declarative way, which is exactly how I like to do it. Now, the next thing that we might want to do is create something called a constraint. So as an example, in this app that we are building, we have a one-to-many relationship. So one user can potentially swipe on one person many times, and we do not want this to happen in our app. And so we don't want the same person to swipe multiple times on someone else, right? It would make sense in this app And we don't want that to happen. Well, fortunately, with Supabase and SQL databases, you can create a constraint that would prevent that. And so here is my prompt: create a constraint to make sure that the same user can swipe someone else more than once. And here it's telling us exactly what it's going to do. And here's how you might alter your swipes table to include this constraint. And so it generated a constraint on an existing table. We're not creating a new table. We're not creating a new view, but we are creating a limitation on what kind of data can go into an existing table. That's called a constraint. And so I can copy this constraint. I can go back into my Supabase, click on the SQL editor right here, paste this constraint, and then I can simply run it. And we have success. No rows return. And what we just did is we created a unique constraint on two fields: swiper ID and swipey ID. And of course, ChatGPT explained all of this right here. And so what this means is that, the swipes table will never be able to have, more than one record where this combination of these two fields is the same. So if I'm, let's say, swiper ID 1, and someone else is swiper ID 5, you can only create that record once. So it's going to be 1 and 5, right? Because this is 1, this is 5. But if we try to do it again, it's going to give an error. It's going to say something like, we can't do it because of the constraints. And actually, now if you go back to your table here, so let's click on swipes here, and you click on definition, you should see that constraint right there. And as you can see, we have this constraint right here: constraint unique swipe pair, unique swiper ID, and swipey ID. And this is exactly what we called it: unique swipe pair. And so as you're building your apps, think about the different scenarios that you do not want to happen in your apps, because with relational databases, you need to make sure that, if something happens on your app, that your database is protected, right? So in this case, we don't want to create multiple records, even though we might have a bug in our app that allows that behavior. And thankfully, you can fix that on your database backend level by creating a constraint, thereafter limiting what kind of data can go into your table. And as a side point, you can ask ChatGPT, what kind of constraints do you recommend that I create for what tables? And if it knows the kind of app that you're building, if it already gave you the schema, it can suggest various constraints on various tables that you can create in order to make your app more robust. Now, another thing that you can do is you can get ChatGPT to help you create various API calls. So if you click on API docs in your Supabase dashboard, you can learn about the API interface. And most importantly, you can actually pick a table or a view and see customized calls for your specific operation. You want to make sure you pick bash here, and you can also select your anon key here. And down below, you're going to see your various calls. So for instance, select email, select right swipe, select left swipes. Now, all of this is something that you can do in Flutterflow, right? Flutterflow supports, the select query, it supports inserts, deletes, etc., etc. What Flutterflow does not support when it comes to Supabase is searching or filtering. And so if you scroll down, there's an API call that you can use for filtering. And that means you can create a separate API request in your Flutterflow app in order to do filtering or searching before you display the actual data to your end users. Now, here's a sample request. And as you can see, what it's doing here is it's filtering on a specific column. So it's saying ID equals 1. Now, let's say you want to filter on a different column, let's say the email column or the name column, and you also want to do case insensitive filtering, right? So you don't care about case, and you also want to make sure that whatever that you're filtering for can be in the middle, can be in the beginning, or can be at the end. And it doesn't need to be equal exactly. Well, how do you do that? Well, you can read Supabase documentation in order to do that, or copy this sample API request into your ChatGPT prompt and say something like, convert this API call to do case insensitive filtering on an email field, and then you can paste the provided API call, and it's telling you Supabase allows you to perform case insensitive filtering using the I like insensitive like operator. And here it went ahead and generated your API call for you. And so it's using the email field just like how we specified, and it's using this I like, and it's also using the percentage sign as a way to wrap your search query that's going to be in here. So whatever the user is typing in the app, you will need to insert it here and then put this before it and this after it, and that's going to give you case insensitive search functionality that you can use with your apps. Now, obviously, you can take this further. You can ask it to do this, you can ask it to do that, and you're getting customized responses specifically for your use case, where you would otherwise would need to read documentation and try to figure things out on yourself. This is going to save you a ton of time and a ton of effort. Last but not least, you can get ChatGPT to make your database more secure. So if you take a look at this table that we've created, the swipes table, it's telling us that we are allowing anonymous access to our table. So we need to enable row level security. So I'm going to click here and I'm going to enable row level security for this table. Here I'm going to click on enable RLS, click confirm, and now RLS is enabled, but we do not have any policies created yet. And so we can click on new policy. And so obviously you can get started from a template here, or you can do full customization here. Or another thing that you can do is you can get ChatGPT to create a customized row level security policy for you. And so you can use this prompt to do just that. Create an RLS policy for swipes table that allows everyone to read, but only user owners can modify data. And so it's telling us first ensure that your RLS is enabled on your swipes table, which we just did. And this is where it's creating these policies. So we can copy this, go back here, click on SQL, paste it in here, execute it, and we have success. And now if we go to our table, we have one active RLS policy. So if I click here, we have this select all that we've just created with the help of ChatGPT. And obviously this is just scraping the top of the surface. There's so many things that you can do when it comes to ChatGPT, helping you augment your Supabase skills in order to help you build more robust and secure apps. Now, if you guys are watching this video, chances are you're super interested in using Supabase for your no-code apps, or you are already using Supabase in your no-code apps. And in fact, when I recently took a poll inside of our Patreon community, I was really surprised that more than 80% of the people are using Supabase with their no-code apps. Plus, a lot of people are actually looking to migrate from Firebase to Supabase. And if you're interested in using Supabase, or you are already using Supabase but looking to go to the next level, then you definitely need to check out our amazing Patreon community. Because when you join our amazing Patreon community, not only will you get access to these exact ChatGPT transcripts, but you will also get access to all the apps that I publish on this channel, which means you will be able to easily view and or clone these apps and start using them for your own purposes, whether that's to learn how a certain technique is implemented, or if you're interested in taking some of the apps that I built and building something on top of it, rebranding, and it's really up to you. You're 100% free to do whatever you want with these apps. I know a lot of people use these apps in order to implement a certain technique in the app that they're building without starting from scratch or reinventing the wheel. Plus, you will also get access to extra content such as our Q&As, live streams, behind the scenes content, and our Patreon supported masterclass series where I do a deep dive on specific topics that the community votes on. And more importantly, when you join our amazing Patreon community, you're going to be supporting this channel and supporting my work, and that is greatly, greatly appreciated. So if all of this sounds like something that you might be interested in, and if you feel that you're going to get value out of it and perhaps take your no-code development to the next level, then I sincerely hope to see you inside of our amazing Patreon community. And you can do just that via the link in the description below the video.